On the night of August 18, 1590, a man named John White stood on the deck of a ship anchored off the Carolina coast and played a trumpet into the dark, waiting for 116 people to answer. They had been gone for 3 years. There were no bodies. There were no graves. There was no wreckage, no ash, no sign of violence. Nothing that would tell a man what had happened to his daughter, or to the 9-day-old granddaughter he had left on that island and never once held. There was only a word. Most people have heard the name Roanoke. Almost nobody has sat with what it actually means. It gets filed under American mystery, mentioned in passing, reduced to a footnote about a strange word and a vanished colony. The full weight of what happened on that island, and the full weight of what was done to the people left there, has been quietly absorbed into the comfortable category of things that are old enough not to require our grief. They are not old enough. In 1587, a group of 116 English men, women and children boarded ships and crossed the Atlantic Ocean to build a settlement on a remote island they had never seen, in a land none of them had ever touched. They were not soldiers. They were farmers, craftsmen, mothers, fathers, people who had been promised land and a fresh start by the most powerful naval empire on earth. Sir Walter Raleigh had recruited them personally. Queen Elizabeth had endorsed the expedition. Governor John White, an accomplished artist and cartographer who had already made one voyage to the Americas, who had mapped the coastline and met the people who lived there, had been appointed to lead them. They had every reason to believe that if something went wrong, someone would come. Among the settlers was White's own daughter, Eleanor. She was pregnant when she boarded the ship. On August 18, 1587, just weeks after the colony's arrival, she gave birth to a daughter. They named her Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas. She was 9 days old when everything changed. Eleanor had not come only because her father led the expedition. She had come because she wanted to own land, something no woman of her class could do in England, and because the New World was the only place in 1587 where that was possible. These were not abstractions. They were people with names and faces and reasons for going. They had made a bet on the future, and they had made it with everything they had. But when John White finally fought his way back to that island 3 years later, he would do something that no history book has ever fully explained. He would read the word, turn around, and sail away. Governor John White did not want to leave. He said so, plainly and on record. When the colonists voted unanimously that he should be the one to return to England and appeal personally for resupply, he objected. He argued. He told them it would look like abandonment, a governor deserting his post before the colony had established itself. He told them he was worried about what people in London would say. He did not say what else he was worried about. He did not need to. He had a daughter on that island who was 9 days out of childbirth. He had a granddaughter he had held exactly once. He was being asked to board a ship and put an ocean between himself and both of them, and he was being asked to do it by the very people he was supposed to protect. They insisted. The logic was sound. He was the governor. He had the connections. He was the only person who could navigate the bureaucracy in London quickly enough to matter. He was the only one who could make this work. He went, and before he left, he gave them a system. If they needed to relocate while he was gone, they would carve the name of their destination into a visible surface: a tree, a post, a door frame. If they were in distress when they moved, they would add a Maltese cross above the name. That was all. Simple. Clear. An agreement between a man and 116 people who trusted him to come back. The ship left on August 27, 1587. White arrived in England and immediately encountered the machinery of empire at war with itself. England and Spain were on the edge of open conflict. Queen Elizabeth issued a stay on all English vessels. Not one ship could leave port for the Americas. White petitioned. He lobbied. He called in every favor he had spent a career accumulating. 2 small ships were eventually released to him in 1588, but Spanish privateers attacked them mid-voyage and turned them back before they cleared the Atlantic. The Spanish Armada came. England fought for its survival. The colony on Roanoke Island was not a military priority, not a commercial priority, not any kind of priority at all for anyone in London except the man who had left his family there and could not get back to them. White spent 3 years trying to get back. 3 full years. 3 winters during which 116 people on a remote island, with no resupply, no reinforcement, no communication, no way of knowing whether anyone was even trying, had to survive entirely by their own means in a land that was not theirs, among people they did not fully know, with resources that were already stretched thin before White's ship had cleared the horizon. When White finally secured passage in August of 1590, 3 years and 2 days after he had sailed away from Eleanor and Virginia Dare, the ship's captain agreed to stop at Roanoke only briefly. They had other business. The colony was a detour on a commercial voyage. White took what he could get. They reached the Outer Banks on the night of August 18th. The sea was rough. The light was gone. The captain was reluctant to risk a landing in the dark, and so they anchored offshore. The island was completely black. No fires, no torches, no movement in the tree line. No sign that anything lived there at all. They sounded the trumpets. Standing on the deck of that ship, with the island black and silent 50 yards away, White and the crew lifted brass instruments and played into the dark. They played the kind of music that carries on water, that cuts through wind, that a human ear would recognize from a long way off. They played and they stopped and they listened. They played and they stopped and they listened. Then they sang. English songs, the kind that people know from childhood. Songs that say without saying it, "We are here, we came back. We are looking for you. Please make a sound." The island did not answer. They fired signal guns and watched the muzzle flash illuminate a tree line that showed nothing. No movement, no figures, no returning light. The echo rolled across the water and died in the dark. The shore returned only what a shore returns when everything that was on it is already gone. The sound of water moving against sand, and the sound of wind in trees, and the sound of a man beginning to understand in the dark, at anchor, what he had come all this way to find. They didn't leave a cry for help. They left a forwarding address, and no one arrived before they moved on from that too. What White found when he came ashore was not a scene of disaster. The houses had been carefully dismantled, not destroyed, not burned in panic, but taken apart with intention, the timber salvaged and repurposed. The trunks the colonists had buried for safekeeping had been dug up and rifled, the contents removed or scattered, and in the center of what had been the settlement stood something that had not been there when White left. A palisade fort, built from heavy logs, solid and substantial, the kind of structure that requires weeks of organized labor from enough able-bodied people working in coordination to complete. These were not people who disappeared. These were people who decided. On the post of the palisade entrance, no cross above it, no mark of distress, the single carved word, CROATOAN. No cross. According to the agreement John White had established before he left, the system he had designed specifically so that he would know, the absence of a cross meant the colonists were not in distress. They had not been attacked. They had not been driven out. They had packed. They had built a fort. They had carved a word. And then at some point during the 3 years that John White spent trying to get back to them, they had walked away on their own terms. The CROATOAN were a Native American tribe living on Hatteras Island, roughly 50 miles south of Roanoke. They were not strangers. White had mapped their territory. A CROATOAN man named Montejo had traveled to England twice and served as the living bridge between the colony and his own people. CROATOAN was not a cryptic message. It was an address written by people who expected it to be read. Archaeological work on Hatteras Island in the early 21st century uncovered a gold signet ring bearing the image of a praying figure. A personal object, not a trade item, embedded in a domestic layer alongside copper objects and a gun barrel fragment. Someone had been using these things. Someone had been living with them. And then there is the fort. The palisade White found required upright notched timber, coordinated labor, and a minimum of 3 to 4 weeks of work from at least 20 to 30 able-bodied adults. It was not built by a colony in terminal collapse. Whatever happened to 116 people on that island, it happened after they had finished the fort, after they were still, as far as the evidence shows, capable of intention. 3 theories have survived serious scrutiny. Each begins from the same carved word. Each leaves one thing it cannot explain. Imagine you are Montejo. You have crossed the Atlantic twice. You understand, better than anyone on that island, what survival requires in this land. And it does not require waiting for a ship that is not coming. The theory of voluntary integration holds that the colonists walked south to CROATOAN Island and joined the tribe that had been their closest ally. The colony did not vanish. It transformed. Over years of intermarriage, any surviving English identity would have become unrecognizable to investigators who did not know what they were looking for. What this theory cannot explain is the silence. If any of them remained English-speaking into adulthood, the volume of subsequent English expeditions along the Carolina coast makes it almost unthinkable that not one person ever walked out of the trees and said, "I am here. I am English. My name is," unless they had decided by then that they no longer wanted to be found. The second theory begins at the moment the first one reaches its limit. Picture the Jamestown settlers, 1607. They are 20 years too late, but they are hearing things. Native informants across different tribes describing a settlement to the south or west where pale-skinned people live in European-style houses and work copper and iron. The split colony theory holds that the colony divided, one group to CROATOAN, a larger group inland toward the Chesapeake Bay, where earlier surveys had promised better land. They built something. They survived. They became something the English who came looking for them wouldn't have known how to recognize. What this theory cannot explain is Powhatan. In 1607, the paramount chief reportedly told Captain John Smith he had personally ordered the massacre of English survivors who had lived among a neighboring tribe for 20 years, producing iron implements as proof. If partially accurate, the colonists survived the abandonment, built something real, and were destroyed in the same decade that English ships arrived to find them. They outlasted everything except the timing. The third theory is the one that is hardest to hold. The researchers who arrived here began with a list of things that are not there. No sustained European artifact trail consistent with 116 people on Hatteras Island for years. No oral history from any native community describing the integration of a large English group. No genetic evidence that resolves the question. The theory of early death holds that most of the colonists did not survive the 3-year gap. In this reading, the fort was a last defense, built by people who saw what was coming. The carved word was a final direction given by people already diminished, pointing toward help that might reach any survivors they could not take with them. What this theory cannot explain is the fort. Dying people do not spend their last weeks building a defensive wall from notched timber. The fort is not consistent with a colony in terminal decline. It is consistent with a colony that was, when the fort was built, still functioning, still planning, still alive. Whatever killed them, If anything, killed them. Killed them after they had finished it. Eleanor Dare was 22 years old. She had crossed an ocean. She had given birth on a remote island with no physician, no midwife, no mother nearby. She had stood on a shore and watched her father's ship grow small on the horizon and disappear. And then she waited. She waited through one autumn and one winter and one spring and one summer and another autumn. And the ship did not come. The ship did not come. And at some point, we do not know when, we do not know what finally shifted the weight of the decision. She stopped waiting. She built a fort. She carved a word. She walked toward whatever came next. When John White finally read that word, he tried to reach CROATOAN Island. The weather was too severe. The captain refused the risk. He sailed back to England. He never returned. Eleanor Dare never left a second message. Do you think she stopped waiting for her father? Or do you think she waited for him until the very end? Leave your answer in the comments. And if this case has stayed with you the way it stays with everyone who really looks at it, there are more where this came from. Subscribe to Eon Discoveries, and the next investigation will find you before you go looking for it. Somewhere on an island off the coast of North Carolina, someone pressed a blade into wood and left the door ajar. 436 years later, no one has walked back through it to explain what it meant. And the man who was supposed to come back and open it arrived, read the word, and sailed away.